All right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The War Room, courtesy of YouTube. I am your host, Admiral Sigma Jones. My co-host, Logic's Finest, is not here at the moment. I do apologize for the late notice for everybody. Had some things I had to tie in before the episode tonight. But first and foremost, we just want to give a shout out to our subscribers. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in. We truly appreciate the love and support. Hope y'all are doing well on tonight or this morning, depending on where you are around the world on today. So I know tonight is the last night before daylight saving time starts on tomorrow. And so that's going to change a lot of clocks here in the US for that matter. But that's the subject for another day. So, for tonight's episode, we are going to finish up chapter 5 of Hitler in the 1920s. And this will be the last section before we finally get to the beer hall pooch. And I'm definitely looking forward to that particular episode as we get ready to go into that venture. All right. Oh, and here is our co-host. I definitely have to apologize, good sir. Sorry for the late notice and everything. But how are you doing on today?
Hey, I'm good. I'm here. That's all that matters.
Yeah, I was telling the audience that I had some last minute things to kind of wrap up before the show, and so the timing was off a bit, and I realized like, oh, I forgot to send the link for my co-host and everything. So, yeah, just want to apologize for that. But hey, better here than never.
Hey, these things happen. No worries.
Awesome. So I was telling the audience that tonight is the last of chapter 5. So we're actually going to wrap that up tonight. And finally, we'll get into chapter 6. And chapter 6 of the book Adolf Hitler, the definitive biography, we finally get into the beer hall pooch. And I really looking forward to this particular chapter because this will show the audience a true definition of an attempted coup.
There is that term again. It's so funny because it's amazing how the media creates a story. The media creates mindset. It's amazing because again, if you look at the textbook definition of a coup, the
Mm-hmm.
leader of a state is removed from power, and the the command and control of the military is seized and taken control of. None of those things happened in January of 2021. In fact, your sitting leader incited a riot. So that's what happened. There was no coup. There was, by every definition, by every metric, there was no coup. I don't, but hey, what do I know? I'm just a simple man trying to make his way in the galaxy.
Likewise, good sir. And again, as I will call us children of history,
Ah,
this is
yes.
why I love to go back in history for references. So that way, if I feel like, maybe I need to brush up on my definition of a coup or even an attempted coup, we have plenty and a plethora of examples, and especially examples leading up to World War II, that can easily show the audience okay, here's what an attempted coup looks like, and here's what a riot looks like. So that way, there's no. This is one of those cases where it's pretty straight black and white, no in betweens.
It's funny because the United States, the United States found someone, they trained him, they equipped him, they gave him intelligence, and they literally set him up, trained him, equipped him for the specific purpose of a political coup. This
Hmm.
person being El Jefe, Fidel Castro, and he overthrew President Batista. But, of course, as we all know, he turned the tables And then he told the U.S., no, I'm not your puppet. I'm not your pawn. And Cuba will not continue to be a vassal state. Thanks for the guns and the ships and the intel. See you later.
Well, you know what? With that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it because I'm excited. Like I said, this is the last section before we get into the beer hall pooch. And to me, I definitely want to let this episode transition into that scenario because, oh, we got so many gold mines. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Execute.
All right, so we're in the last section, section 5 of chapter 5, and it starts off by stating this. Murphy was only reflecting the impressions of local officials throughout Bavaria who misread the resultant political lull after May Day as a definite turn away from Hitler and his movement. This inertia continued except for a brief flurry by the execution of a German nationalist, Albert Leon Sklackler, who had blown up railroad tracks near Duisburg as a protest against French occupations of the Ruhr. He was tried for sabotage by the French and was shot on May the 26th. When Hafstengel heard that a number of patriotic organizations were going to stage a protest demonstration in the Königsplatz the following week, the Königsplatz, he felt that Hitler should return from his holiday in the mountains and participate. He took the train to Berchtesgaden, a beautiful resort town on the border of Germany and Austria near Salzburg, where he found Hitler. I had fallen in love with the landscape. Registered under the name of Herr Wolf at the Pension Moritz on a steep hill known as the Obersalzberg. At first, Hitler was not enthusiastic about addressing a demonstration with so many diverse speakers, but Hamstickel persisted and the two began blocking out a speech. That night, Eckert, who shared Hamstickel's bedroom, complained that Hitler would parade around swinging his rhinoceros hide whip in a swashbuckling manner to impress the wife of the pension manager. The way Adolf is carrying on now goes beyond me, he said. The man is plain crazy. He told of overhearing Hitler show off to the lady in question by denouncing Berlin in extravagant terms. The luxury, the perversion, the iniquity, the wanton display, and the Jewish materialism disgusted me so thoroughly that I was almost beside myself. I nearly imagined myself to be Jesus Christ when he came to his father's temple and found the money changers. Whereupon, claimed Eckert, Hitler brandished his whip and exclaimed that it was his mission to descend upon the capital like a Christ and scourge the corrupt. The following day, Hitler accompanied Hamstickel to the station and, as they descended the Obersalzberg, remarked that Eckert, whom he had recently replaced as editor of the party newspaper, had become an old pessimist, a senile weakling. Schopenhauer had only turned him into a doubting Thomas. Where would I get if I listened to all his transcendental talk? A nice ultimate wisdom that to reduce oneself to a minimum of desire and will. One will is gone. All is gone. This life is war. He began whistling the swan song from Lohengrin, in a curious soft tremolo. Anton Drexler and his wife also disapproved of Hitler's play acting on the Obersalzberg. They were equally disconcerted by his growing enthusiasm for revolutionary action. Their alarm was shared by others who objected to his associating with industrialists, wealthy socialites, and bankers rather than building a solid base of genuine socialists from the working class. Hitler must have been aware that he faced another revolt within the party, one born of discontent and dismay amongst those who first held highest hopes for him as leader of Germany's Renaissance. Early that September, Hitler attempted to bolster his slipping prestige by a public appearance. The occasion was the German Day celebration in Nuremberg, which took place the first 2 days of September, the anniversary of the Battle of Sedan. More than 100,000 nationalists swarmed into the ancient city, parading through the streets, and, according to a state police report, generating such enthusiasm as had not been seen in Nuremberg since 1914. The streets were a sea of Nazi and Bavarian flags as the crowd roared Heil, waved handkerchiefs, and tossed flowers and wreaths at Ludendorff and the marching units. It was the unbridled expression of that multitude of defeated, miserable, displaced, and shattered people who now saw a ray of hope, of freedom from slavery and need. Many women and men cried, so overcome were they by emotion. So, before we continue, I wanted to point it out in this one particular paragraph where Hitler is talking with the manager of the pension, and he talks about how he imagined himself to be like Jesus Christ when he came to his father's temple and found money changers.
Yeah, I saw that. It's funny because Hitler had his own views on, the I really don't know what other way to put it. The social decay, the decadence, because we're talking about the Weimar Republic. Okay, so now
Mm-hmm.
we're in the 1920s. So we're talking about, the freedom, live who you are, express who you want to be. Homosexuality is open and out, and you can be whoever you want to be. And, listen, again, I have no problem with that. But
Mm.
it's everything else that came along with it. Because there were no restraints. There was open prostitution and there was of all kinds. Okay? So, and on top of all of that, in the face of, on the one hand, you had wealth and opulence and you had business, you also had open drugs, um, open drug, open drugs being sold and used openly,
Mm.
prostitution openly, um, you know, um, of all kinds. And in the midst of all of that, again, there was no focus on the economy, on the military, on the infrastructure. So the country was, while these people were living in this new fantasy world that they created with a lot of social decay, the majority of the country, which did not live in the major cities, the majority of the country was still out of war, out of work, and they were still poor, and the infrastructure had no investment in it. And the Weimar Republic could never form a consensus government anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
Hitler, and in the midst of all of this, again, this is not unprecedented. This has happened throughout all of recorded history. When a country gets to this point, you have a strong man who comes along and says, listen, I'm going to clean everything up. I'm going to fix everything up. And he felt this was his time, and he was that person.
Indeed. And I'm glad you brought up as far as like the Weimar Republic. Now, for the audience who remember, we talked about how in the early 20s, the early 1920s, excuse me, that the Weimar Republic was still in a bad spot. You got the reparations from the war, you got a new type of government that, let's just be honest, is not fully functional. And if it was going in the wrong direction. You have hyperinflation that's going on. And all this happening to a group of people that, for most of their lives, have lived under a monarchy. And then within a flip of a coin, are now being forced to live in a democracy. And their impressions of that democracy is not that good. Even
Yeah.
with the whole freedoms that comes with it and everything, and the freedom of associations and whatnot, and being yourself, the way the government was being ran without any stability definitely was starting to leave a bad taste in a lot of folks' mouths.
Right, and that's the key. So, you know, for most Americans, right? Well, for all Americans, um, democracy. You elect leaders, and you have a government, and you have a president, and you have a Congress, and you have a Supreme Court. Fine. Imagine if literally tomorrow you're told all of that is going away, and come Monday morning you're going to have a king. You'd lose your mind. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if the king managed to improve everything, invest in education and infrastructure, and improve the economy, guess what? Over time, you're going to say, okay, you know what? This monarchy seems to be working. Let's go with it. However,
Mm-hmm.
if none of those things happen, then you're going to say, you know what? Let's go back to the democracy. So that's the point that people really need to understand. People were born under a monarchy, and that's all that Germany ever had, and that's all that many people had ever known.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were at this point over the age of 10, literally in Germany, all you've ever known was a monarchy. Now you have free and fair elections, but nothing is improving, and the country was in such a bad state after World War One. So when another strong man comes along and says, "Listen, I'm going to be the guy. I'm not a king. You're going to vote for me, but I'm the guy. I am your focus." So in their minds, oh, okay, another one person who's going to lead us and fix everything, and everything will go back to the way that it was. And I think that really sums up this situation was.
Right. And to me, it's just unfortunate that Germany had the foundation to start off the Weimar Republic in a good way, but my opinion, as long as they had that reparations from the war hanging over their head, it was doomed to fail from the beginning.
It was, and another thing that really sticks out to me is when facing differing viewpoints, and every group has viewpoints. There is no such thing as a monolith. So whenever I hear people say, "We all have to be on code," I'm like, hey, come on, listen, stop. That has never happened anywhere in the face of this planet. But I digress. So my point here is that when facing dissent from within the ranks, Hitler said, he already knows how to appeal to emotions. So what does
Mm-hmm.
he do? He starts appealing to people's emotions. So those who are dissent, they can now be quickly and silently pushed to the side, because now they no longer are seen to represent the vision of the people. Again,
Mm-hmm.
brilliant political maneuvering on the part of Adolf.
Indeed, sir, indeed. Well, let's continue. So next it says the largest number of marchers came from the NSDAP. And after the opening parade, Hitler spoke at one of the meetings. He looked more groomed than he had at Coburg, with pressed suit, low cut shoes, and neatly slicked down hair. In a few weeks, the dice will roll, he declared prophetically. What is in the making today will be greater than the World War, excuse me. It will be fought out on German soil for the whole world. On the second day, the German Battle League was formed. Outwardly, an association of nationalists, it was a creature of the NSDAP. Its Secretary General was Scoopner Reichert. Its military leader was another Hitler man. One of its main organizations, the Reichsflag, was dominated by Rom, and its initial proclamation, written by Feder, sounded as if it came out of Hitler's mouth. It declared opposition to parliamentarianism, international capital, the class struggle, pacifism, Marxism, and the Jews. German Day at Nuremberg and the founding of the German Battle League mark Hitler's public return to revolutionary tactics. This became more apparent a month later when he was officially made political leader of the new organization. Its actions program called openly for seizure of power in Bavaria, and the rumor spread that Hitler was preparing a revolution. He did, in fact, announce openly that he intended to act rather than allow the Reds to seize power again. The task of our movement, as always, is to prepare for the coming collapse of the Reich, so that when the old trunks falls, the young fir tree may be already standing. Although the minister-president of Bavaria, Eugen von Nilly, shared some of Hitler's beliefs, he had been pushed to the edge of patience by his rabble-rousing tactics. On the 26th of September, Nilling told his cabinet that the emergency was so grave that a state commissar general should be appointed who, while subordinate to the cabinet, would have a free hand in the exercise of the executive power. He proposed former Minister President von Kahr, who had the support of several nationalist groups and was held in esteem by both conservative monarchists and the Catholic Church. In the name of the law and order, Kahr accepted this onerous position, and his first act was to ban 14 mass meetings the Nazis had planned for the morrow. This action was both a threat and an opportunity for Adolf Hitler, who had just returned from a trip to Switzerland to solicit funds. If he submitted it, it could mean ruin. If he had successfully resisted, he could become a politician of national importance. He was cautioned to retreat and fight another day. The movement was not yet strong enough for action, but those close to the rank and file urged him to act. If nothing happens now, the men will sneak away, said the head of the SA Regiment Munich. In order to keep the men together, said Scoopner Reichter, one must finally undertake something. Otherwise, they will become left radicals. That last statement, where he said, in order to keep the men together, one must finally undertake something. Otherwise, they become left radicals.
You know, that statement is more powerful than I think a lot of people realize, because if left to their own devices, what this guy was saying, exactly, they're going to become radicals. However, if we show them some sort of action, we can keep them in the fold, we can keep them under control, is basically what he's saying. So, politics is a very strange thing, So you have people who are going to talk, and they always talk a good game, but then you have those who will take action, and at some point, how far along or how aggressive, or even if necessary, how active or how violent are those actions going to be? Those people, unfortunately, they're a double-edged sword. If you can keep them under control, they work to your benefit. If you can't, they can backfire on you.
Very true. Very true. And it's something because I kind of look at least the political environment here in America,
Right.
and it's something how the young and the youthful want to be so politically involved.
Hmm.
Like it's hard for me to imagine when I was a teenager. I was doing typical teenager things, far as school, far as curricular activities during school and after school, hanging out with friends and whatnot. But now a lot of teenagers today, and you know what, it could be me. It could be me, depending on my area and whatnot, especially being out here on the West Coast. But it just seems to me that a lot of teenagers now really want to be involved politically. Whatever the circumstances that's going on, they feel like they gotta do something. They gotta be involved.
Hmm.
And it's sad because I'm just gonna be honest, they're just mere puppets on a grand scale of things.
They really are, and to me, it's again that's why I keep saying it. It's funny to me how the media creates stories, but the media shapes mindsets.
Hmm.
The things that people talk about, they think they're talking about it, and they think that it's near and dear to them. But this idea has literally been put into your head by someone else, and that someone
Hmm.
else is the media. So the question you have to ask is who's controlling the media. But again, that's way too deep down that rabbit hole. But yeah, it's funny, politicians, just like the military, like our good friend Dr. Phoenix always says, they want to get you when you're young and impressionable and full of energy,
Hmm.
because then they have you for a long time, because you're full of energy and you're not thinking straight, and you think you're thinking, but you're so malleable, and they can just
Hmm.
twist twist up your head, and just you're basically a wind up doll.
Exactly.
For lack of a better term.
Very accurate indeed, and this, and we all been there, as far as teenagers and all, as far as like we know everything and whatnot.
Hmm.
But I could definitely say my understanding now of politics is vastly different compared to what I thought I knew about politics back when I was a teenager. And even then, you know, and like I said, it's just me. I can't speak for everybody and whatnot. But back then, I was just like, you know, I'll vote when it suits me and whatnot because you know there's just not much that entices me. But then
Hmm.
at the same time, I have friends that as soon as they saw something on the news, as you rightfully pointed out, sir, it was just you just say the right words, and all of a sudden they was like, I gotta start this campaign. I gotta get out here and strut my stuff and be a voice and whatnot. And it's just like you said, being young, full of energy, and maulable. That's the key term. Because I'm just gonna be honest, very few teenagers, very few have a clear understanding of what goes on in the world around them during that time.
Very, very, very few. I mean, very few. When I was when I was a teenager, the Iran Contra affair hearings were broadcast on television.
Mm.
So for me, that's something that I lived through, and I learned that the rule of law in the United States of America is hot air. You can literally steal, kill people, engage in embezzlement, break all kinds of laws. It doesn't matter. As long as you have the right friends, you will not go to jail. Because
Hmm.
President Reagan should have gone to jail. Vice President Bush should have gone to jail. Colonel Oliver North should have gone to jail. Admiral Poindexter should have gone to jail. Richard Secord should have gone to jail. Several other gentlemen, Secretary Weinberger should have gone to jail. Not one of these men served a single day behind bars. And that taught me, that opened my eyes. It's a lie. America is the word, the rule of law is a total and absolute lie. And then I lived through the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it taught me over and over and over again, from when Vice President Bush became President Bush, to then President Clinton, to then Baby Bush. And when I was in my last year of high school, um, I I took political science, and the first week I hated it. I said, "What the hell is this? Who cares? It's politics." By the end of that semester, my eyes were completely open and changed. Wow, this is the way things really happen. So, yeah, and I say all of that to say, yeah, you know what? As a teenager, this is just my personal opinion from observations. Unless you literally are born and grow up in a war torn country, you don't know the way the world really works. You just don't.
Mm. Ooh, boy. Mm. And given
Yes, I
today's,
I
given,
chose I, I chose my words very carefully with that last one. Unless you grew up
yeah,
in a war torn country, you don't really know what's going on as a teenager.
and given today's environment, I won't go into the details, but we definitely have clear examples of that.
Yeah.
All right. So next it says, these were the urgings Hitler heeded. This impulse for action set him on the road to revolution, and he began searching Munich and its environs for activist allies. His days were filled with interviews and visits to a variety of influential men, military figures, politicians, industrialists, and officials. He talked to the party faithful as well as those who wavered, promising, threatening, and cajoling. The one sentence he continuously used was, "We must compromise these people so that they have to march with us." Absolutely no one could ever persuade him to change his mind. Once it was made up, recalled Helene Hamstigel. On a number of occasions, when his followers tried to coerce him, I noticed the faraway, unheeding expression in his eyes. It was as though he had closed his mind to all ideas but his own. That autumn, the faraway, unheeding expression in his eyes had a pacific meaning. He saw himself emulating Mussolini, and his march would be to Berlin. Nor was this a vision he revealed only to intimates. In a conference with right wing military men, he called for an attack on Berlin with all Bavaria's forces. Hitler now had definite Napoleonic and messianic ideas, recalled one of those present. He declared that he felt the call within himself to save Germany, and that this role would fall to him, if not now, then later. He then drew a number of parallels with Napoleon, especially with the return of Napoleon from Elba to Paris.
Uh oh. Didn't we just talk about this? Didn't
Yes, you
yeah.
did.
Again, if we go back to the very first and the very first two streams that we discussed it many moons ago, he was failed in the military. He had next to no military career. He never went to war college. He was failed at his art school. He was considered going to the seminary. So this was a man who, again, had no formal military strategical training other than being a foot soldier. This is a man
Mhm.
who everything he applied himself to, he failed because he did not have the self discipline or the study. So when he was finally in a position of power, what what did all of that upbringing What did all of that making and molding do? It created a person who would not listen to anyone except himself. Either you're with
Mm-hmm.
him or against him, and there was zero room for anything else. So we see how, as we've been saying from day one, monsters are not made or born, not are not born, they're made.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. And believe me, we're going to see many, many instances, even going into the 30s and a little bit of 40s,
Mm-hmm.
where many of Hitler's close hand mans have tried to reconcile, have tried to give different advices, different points of views, and Hitler would have none of it.
Which is why we have, listen, Admiral Raider, we're jumping too, I'm jumping too far ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
No problem. And shout out to JJ Wilson. Good to see you, sir. So now we get into chapter 6. And this is the beginning of the beer hall putsch, which putsch in German means coup. So this is in 1923, and we are now going to get into this specific event that literally would change the direction and even the futures of these potential leaders of World War II. So we start off with section 1, and it says on the last day of September 1923, Hitler received an unsettling letter from an old member and fanatic member of your movement who pointed out a startling prediction in the current yearbook of the well known astrologer Frau Elsbeth Eberton, a man of action born of April the 20th, 1889. It said, can expose himself to personal danger by excessively uncautious action and very likely trigger off an uncontrollable crisis. The stars showed that this man was to be taken very seriously indeed. He is destined to play a Führer role in future battles. He,
And really quick, the word Führer in German means leader. That's all that it means. That's all it
Mhm.
means. Führer is German for the word leader.
Yes, sir. It then says he was destined to sacrifice himself for the German people, or excuse me, the German nation. Although no name was mentioned, it was apparent that Frau Eberton, Eberton, was referring to Hitler. And while she did not specify any particular date, she warned that acting rashly in the near future would endanger his life. Another astrologer, Wilhelm Wolff, years later, he would advise Himmler's SS on astrological matters. Also cast Hitler's horoscope late that summer and was definite about a date. His prediction was also ominous: violence with a disastrous outcome for the subject during the period of November the 8th to the 9th, 1923. Such prophecies were seriously regarded in many quarters. Several German psychiatrists and psychologists were already considering the idea of psychological astrology. Dr. O.A.H. Smith, an ordered disciple of the Swiss psychiatrist C.G. Jung.
No, that's Carl Jung. Remember this, that's a German name. It's Carl Jung.
Carl Jung, C.G. Jung, had recently suggested that astrology might be exactly what psychology needed. But Hitler's comment on Frau Eberton's prediction was, what on earth have women and stars got to do with me?
That's funny considering that after the beer hall putsch, when Hitler found astrology, and esoteric works.
Mm-hmm.
That's funny.
Yeah, I had to laugh too because it's like, huh, those words will come back to haunt him later on.
Yeah, because he became a student of Madame Blavatsky, of Theosophy, you know, the ancient, um, many ancient schools of esoteric thought. So
Hmm,
funny that he would say that at that time. It just goes to show where he was at that point in his life and how everything for him and the country changed after 1923.
very true. Next, it says, whether he believed in astrology or not, Hitler was convinced that his own destiny would eventually lead him to success. And as Helen Hafstagel had noticed, he had turned out all but affirmative voices. By coincidence, he found one of them the same day he received Frau Eberton's astrological warning. Excuse me. It came in Bayreuth at the Via Wanfried, Wagner's home, where he was paying homage to Cosma, the 86-year-old widow of the master. Winifred Wagner, the English wife of Wagner's son, Siegfried, was already entranced by Hitler and his movement. She welcomed him warmly. Her 6-year-old daughter, Fridolin, thought he looked funny in his Bavarian leather shorts, thick woolen socks, red and blue checkered shirt, and baggy short blue jacket.
Well, that's not Wagner. That's Wagner, as in the composer Wagner.
Ah, okay.
Yes. Now you see the significance.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Okay. All right. Hey, this is what we're here to learn. So now it's making more sense.
Yes, because we know Hitler loved Wagner. He
Oh yeah.
loved the music of Wagner. So even just speaking to his descendants gave him, in his mind, a connection to the man himself.
Very true. Next it says his sharp cheekbones stuck out over hollow pasty cheeks, and above them were a pair of unnaturally bright blue eyes. There was a half starved look about him, but something else too, a fanatical glow. Next it says, ill at ease, Hitler walks shyly, awkwardly around the music room and library, tiptoeing as if he were, in a cathedral. But later in the garden, as he told the Wagners of his plans for the near future, his voice took on tone and color and grew deeper and deeper until we sat like a circle of little charmed birds listening to the music, although we didn't pay any attention to a word he said. After he left, Frau Wagner said, don't you feel that he is destined to be the savior of Germany? Siegfried laughed indulgently. So far he was concerned, Hitler was an obvious fraud, as well as an upstart. Hitler was across the street, making a pilgrimage to the home of aged Houston Stewart Chamberlain, paralyzed in his wheelchair. This son of an English admiral had been drawn to Germany, seeing in her people the master race. He was talented and neurotic, and widely regarded as one of the leading men of culture of his day. A worshipper of Wagner, he had married his daughter, Eva. The English prophet of racism was so taken by Hitler that he had a longer and more refreshing sleep that night than any since he had been seen stricken in August of 1914. He wrote Hitler a few days later, with one blow, you have transformed the state of my soul, that Germany, in the hour of her greatest need, brings forth a Hitler. That is proof of her vitality. Chamberlain's words must have helped solidify the growing sense within Hitler that he was a man of fate. A week or so later, while motoring in his new car through the Bavarian hills with Rosenberg and the Habsticles, fog unexpectedly enshrouded the highway, and the open red Mercedes lurched into a ditch. No one spoke on the way back to Munich. Then he turned to Helene. I noticed you were not at all frightened by our misship. I knew we would not be injured. This will not be the only accident which will leave me unharmed. I shall pass through them all and succeed in my plans. Now that is definitely prophetic.
It's funny how along the ways, it's funny how along the ways there was always someone who who could see right through Adolf. They could see who he was, because he was a fraud and he was an upstart, but
Mm-hmm.
he he was a politician. What he was, he was a fraud. He was fake, but he knew how to manipulate people and he knew how to manipulate emotions. And as we have seen consistently looking at the early history of Adolf, when around certain academicians and around certain people of critical thinking, they could see him for who and what he was, and they wanted no part of him.
Mm-hmm. Sir, you are absolutely right. And again, I really, this is just my opinion, but I feel like the people who saw right through Hitler and what he was all about, I would probably bet you 9 times out of 10, these are the same individuals who don't really get involved when it comes down to politics and religion.
Oh man, do you really want to go down that rabbit hole?
You know
Oh
what?
man.
You know what? We'll just leave that to the wayside.
Yeah,
But
because that is
just
so. Oh man, but you know what? I'll say this: we're we're gonna leave that to the wayside. But coming back to the very last piece here, um, I don't know. I think that there's some part. Listen, he knows, and people like him, specifically Adolf. He knows he's a fraud. He knows he's an upstart. He knows he's a social climber. He knows he's a manipulator. All of that, but some part of him, the part that has the psychological childhood trauma, begins to believe some of his own BS. Not all of it,
mm-hmm,
just some of it.
mm-hmm,
Specifically, the parts here, it's prophetic, and he is destined to be this person, to be this leader. In other words, everything opposite from his childhood, where he was nothing, where he was not valued. Only his mother loved him and cared for him, and he failed at everything and everywhere that he went, and he was a total disappointment to his father. So it's funny how you see how these things play out as an adult who now has real power.
indeed. And speaking of that, JJ said in the chat that he recently watched a video where Adolf Hitler said after politics he wanted to go back to being an artist. And
Mm,
that's true. He actually, which we'll talk about later on down the road, Hitler wanted to reimagine Berlin. Like when you see some of his architectural work that he tried to do behind the scenes, that's what Hitler was talking about. Not so much like just being a regular artist and everything. No, he was going to put his art out to the world in the form of rebuilding and redesigning Berlin.
right, he did because his architect Albert Speer,
Hmm.
he had a specific vision for the architecture of what he would call Germania. So Germany would be the center of basically all of Europe would be under the control. and Europe would be renamed Germania. There would all be one giant state that he was in charge of. So you can see in Berlin, for a person who's familiar with the architecture of the time, you can look at the architecture that everything that Speer designed for Hitler versus everything that came prior. So yeah, he absolutely Adolf found what he felt was a kindred spirit in in Albert in Albert Speer, and
Mm.
he financed and anything that Speer wanted to build, he had an unlimited budget.
Yes, sir, indeed. And so this next section is going to dive into a little bit of the hyperinflation in Berlin during the 1920s. And I want the audience to pay attention to some of the facts that this next section talks about. So it says another aspect of fate in the guise of the inflation also appeared to be working in favor of Hitler and his march on Berlin. By the beginning of October, it took 6,014,300 marks to equal a single pre-war mark. The price of one egg equaled that of 30 million in 1913. Many municipalities and industrial firms took to printing their own emergency money to meet expenses. The Reichsbank could not refuse to accept this emergency money or to treat it as of equal value with their own notes. The printing of government money itself became farcical. A 1,000 mark note issued in Berlin the previous December was now stamped over in red. Ein Milliard Mark. And a 500 million mark note printed by the Bavarian State Bank a few weeks earlier was stamped 20 Milliarden Mark. This 20 billion mark note presumably could be exchanged for more than $800. But by the time the holder of the modest looking little note with the astronomical figure got to the cash foreign currency for it, people were frantic. They dared not hold currency for an hour. A missed trolley card to the bank could mean a man's monthly salary was reduced to a quarter or less.
Can you repeat that sentence? I mean, that's
Yes,
just
sir.
mind-boggling.
A missed trolley card to the bank could mean a man's monthly salary was reduced to a quarter or less. Mm, 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 mm. A waiter in Baden told a young American reporter, Ernest Hemingway, that he had saved up enough money for the gastos. Now, the money would buy 4 bottles of champagne. Germany debases her money to cheat the Allies, said the waiter. But what do I get out of it? The burden of inflation naturally fell on those who could not pay with notes, the workers and the elderly. The first were reduced to a near starvation diet, and the latter were brought to poverty level overnight. Pensioners and those who live on the interest from bonds and life insurance found themselves destitute. Securities bought with gold marks were paid off in paper money that deteriorated in value in one's hand.
Think about that. Repeat that statement. I can barely wrap my head around that concept.
Yes. Um, it says securities bought with gold marks were paid off in paper that deteriorated in value in one's own hands. If you don't mind, sir, I'm gonna let you go ahead and talk for a bit while I take this call.
No worries. So, in America, only Southerners. Mm, mm. Securities bought with gold marks were paid off in paper money that deteriorated in value in one's own hand. I cannot wrap my head around the concept that as you're given money, whether you convert your paycheck, if that's what you do, or you just go to the bank and you withdraw money from your bank account, the money you're holding in your hand as you're looking at it is losing value. I cannot wrap my head around that concept. But again, this is the condition that was created by the Weimar Republic. So when you go to the bank to withdraw your money, as you're counting it, as the teller has physically put it in your hand, as you're counting each individual note, the value of the money in your hand is decreasing literally every second.
Mm-hmm.
I, I cannot wrap my head around that. But in the midst of that chaos, thanks to the Weimar Republic, if you were in a major city, you could go see art museums and you could go see films and you could express yourself however you want to be and you could be whatever shade of rainbow you wanted to be and call yourself whoever you wanted to be because this was the new way forward. Amazing. This is what happens when there's no restraints and there's no focus on the base things that people need to leave to live, basic economy, infrastructure. You know, again, I'm speechless. I am at a loss for words. Holding money in your hand, and as you're looking at it, every
Mm-hmm.
second the value decreases.
And you know, sir, I'm glad you brought that up because I kind of look at the current situation right now in America. So
Mm-hmm.
we're currently going through inflation, and people are really losing their minds, especially like with gas. And okay, I'm just gonna say this for the record and everything. Yes, gas prices right now are too high, especially in certain areas and all. I've already seen signs. Thankfully, not in my area, but in other places, gas prices is now like $8 a gallon. So super crazy,
That's
but
insane.
definitely insane. But could you just imagine? Just imagine as you gave that wonderful analogy. Can you just imagine that at one point, say if you had to go to work and gas costs at least within an hour $8 a gallon. But if you do not go to that gas station within the next hour, gas is now going to cost you $36 a gallon.
Literally, no exaggeration, and that's not an exaggeration, and that's what that's what people who were living in Germany in 1923 were literally facing.
Right.
Literally. And the thing is this, right? So, okay, America, inflation, gasoline, $8 a gallon. Here's the thing, right? America has not seen inflation this bad since the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember I didn't fully understand it because again, 80s, I'm a teenager, but inflation at that time, everyone was saying it was record rates of inflation. Haven't seen anything this bad since the early 70s. There was a recession. And if it keeps going this bad, we're talking inflation numbers that the country hasn't seen since the Great Depression. So now I'm I'm scratching my head and I'm thinking, something that my father, may he rest in peace, used to always say: people have short memories.
Mm-hmm.
All I'm saying is this is not unprecedented. And we've seen this before with the heavy inflation of the 80s, which then led to the recession of the late 80s, which helped to sweep President Bush out of office and President Clinton into office. And people are talking about high gas prices. I may have been a little boy, but I lived through the OPEC oil crisis of the late 70s. I remember sitting in the back of the car playing because no one wore seatbelts back then, but
Mm.
we're literally you're blocks and blocks away on a line just to go to the gas station.
Wow.
Yeah, just crazy. I mean, just crazy. Just literally waiting on line like an hour just to get gas. Assuming that by the time you got there, that station still actually had gas, which then you had to go to drive to find some other station that may or may not have gas to then jump on that line. To wait literally blocks and blocks and blocks just to get gas. Yeah, yeah.
Ah, boy.
That's why
You know what?
I laugh like we've seen all this before. I'm sorry. Go
No,
right
no,
ahead.
no, sir. Go right ahead because I think I know where you about to go. So definitely go right ahead.
No, no, no. Please, please, please. All yours.
Well, what I was just about to say is yes. No, I've yet to meet anybody that say they like inflation. Nobody likes inflation. But when I hear people exaggerating about how bad inflation is right now, I'm just going to be honest. Just like the author just showed here, that the people who were most affected by inflation were the workers and the elderly. Now, this is where it kind of ties in a little bit back to the culture bomb with Dr. Phoenix.
Uh oh.
See, this is where education pays dividends. Because if you're able to put yourself in position to where the problems of inflation is minuscule, if not non-existent, education is actually that pathway to get you over that hump. And I'm saying this because, as somebody who works in IT, and right now, I'm pretty much directors are kind of grooming me to eventually take their positions and everything. I'm just going to be honest. None of that would not be possible without that degree.
Education is the great equalizer. I absolutely had that drilled into my head as a little boy, and I researched and I studied and I studied and I researched and I've read and I've seen. It absolutely is the great equalizer, and it's like the only people who complain about gentrification are those who can't afford to live there. The same way the only people who complain about the prices of luxury cars are people who want them but can't afford to buy them. So again, you can call me elitist, you can call me snobbish, you can call me whatever you want. But if you value education, you're going to go to college, you're going to get a white collar job, you're going to get a high skill, high wage paying job, and this will be and things like this will be less of a concern to you. The only people who are
Mm-hmm.
complaining about automation and replacing jobs are people who didn't value education, people who have low skill, low wage paying jobs. Now listen, I'm not saying that this is nothing to worry about. That's not what I'm saying. But follow up to your point. People who have put themselves in a position, they can weather the storm much better than those at the low end of the socioeconomic strata. And of course, we all know who occupies the low end of the socioeconomic strata. So we don't need to beat that dead horse again.
No, sir. In fact, let's go ahead and continue right where we left off. So next it says, in America, only Southerners whose families had suffered a similar fate after the Civil War days would have understood. About the sole ones who rejoice were those deeply in debt who could pay off their obligations with worthless paper. But the greatest beneficiaries were the exchange barons, the profiteers, and opportunistic foreigners who bought up jewelry and real estate at ridiculously low prices. Large estates and buildings went to these vultures for a few $100s. Family heirlooms were exchanged for enough to feed a family a few weeks. There were scenes beyond belief. A woman who had left a basket full of money on the street, returning a moment later to find the money dumped in the gutter and the basket stolen.
You can't make this stuff up.
No, sir. Oh my goodness.
You know what? You know what? Listen, I'm just gonna say it. I mean, it's no. I don't. That would be like you parking an S-Class Benz in the projects. You come back an hour later, the Benz is sitting there, but someone siphoned out the gas.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect analogy. Like, that's people. For those listening in, this is what hyperinflation looks like. When it's to the point to where a woven basket is worth more than a a stack, pillar, anything you have of money. When it's worth more than that, that shows you what hyperinflation really is.
Yeah, there are pictures. There were pictures of during this time, during the Weimar Republic, little kids taking stacks of money, stacks, and throwing it around, kicking it around the street like it's a toy. Women would take bundles and stacks of money, and they would burn it in their ovens to heat the house. What does that tell you? That's what
Mm.
hyperinflation looks like. So, listen, nobody wants to pay $8 for a gallon of gas. But as you just said, imagine you seeing gas is $8 a gallon. You run into the shopping mall. You come out an hour later. An hour later, it's now $36 a gallon. So by the time you hop in your car and you go across the street and you jump on the line, because there's now a line, and by the time you get to the line, 5 minutes later, the attendant is coming out and he's changing the sign. It's now worth $56 a gallon. That's literally what these people are living through.
Whew. I'm telling people, just imagine yourself in Weimar Republic during this time frame, and you would definitely understand inflation and hyperinflation are totally different worlds. But let's continue. A worker with a salary of 2 billion marks a week, able to buy his family only potatoes. And when distribution of the most basic food broke down, raids on potato fields in law abiding Germany became commonplace.
Yeah, just think about that. People stealing food, cars, and whatever. Jewelry, who cares? Food, stealing food.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a gender war going on. Dumbest thing I read on. How the hell? What the hell is a gender war? That is the dumbest thing I read in my life. But whatever. Anyway,
Oh. Yeah,
I
yeah.
digress.
Let's
Back to the regularly scheduled shenanigans.
yeah, let's get out of that. Says by mid-October, Hitler, after drawing almost 35,000 new members into the party since January, was more than ever convinced that the people were ready for revolution. I can only take action, he told a Nuremberg audience, were my fanatical belief and love for the entire German people led me. Never had his speech never had his speech been delivered with more passion. You cannot imagine how silent it becomes as soon as this man speaks. One ardent follower wrote her family that October. It was as if the entire audience was no longer able to breathe. Sometimes it almost seems to be as if Hitler used a magic charm in order to win the unconditional confidence of old and young alike. Another fascinated listener got so close he could see the spit fly under his mustache. For us, this man was a whirling dervish, but he knew how to fire up the people, not with arguments, which are never possible in hate speeches, but with the fanaticism of his whole manner, screaming and yelling, and above all, by his deafening repetition and a certain contagious rhythm. This he had learned to do, and it has a fearfully exciting, primitive, and barbaric effect. All right, so this is another thing I want to point out, and I'm glad we read this section.
Mhm.
Now, we just talk about how people on the lower end of the spectrum, when it comes down to, economic level,
Mhm.
these are the people who will struggle when it comes to inflation. But now, hear this. These are also the same people who, because their life is already in the negative and they have no means of self reliance, I would say. When you bring somebody who can tap into what this person just says, the primitive and barbaric effect, it's not that hard to lead those people astray.
Bingo. Bingo. I always refer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our good friend Mr. SKC coined a beautiful phrase. What
Yeah.
is it? Eat, fight, sleep, bust.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that is a very comical and colorful description of the lowest tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When when you're at the bottom of the socioeconomic strata, the only thing that matters to you is food, recreation, shelter, and copulation. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't have the ability to focus on anything else because you're at the low end of the socioeconomic strata. And again, a person who knows this, it's easier to tap into and manipulate their emotions. Now, that's not to say that it cannot be done for people higher up the social economic strata, because there are plenty of academicians and scholars and critical thinkers. You can absolutely manipulate their emotions, but the people who occupy the lower end of the socioeconomic strata, it's like taking candy from a baby.
Mm-hmm. And let me just remind folks that our former 45th president of the United States
Mm.
had once made the comment out publicly, he loves the poor and
And
the
uneducated.
uneducated.
Well, he also made another statement, which is where I thought you were going to go, but yours was brilliant. He made another statement. He said he can kill someone in Times Square and people will still love him.
Yep, yes, he did. Yes, he did. All right, let's move on before we go deeper down that rabbit hole.
Yes.
Next, it says in Bavaria, the pressure exerted by such rousing hypnotic speeches made Commissar von Kahr's task, despite his dictate, dictatorial, excuse me, dictatorial power, an impossible one. Called upon to restrain Hitler's violence, he was under pressure from a large segment of the Bavarian leadership to go easy on him. The temper of Bavaria was conservative and nationalistic, and while many regretted Hitler's crude tactics and violent language, they shared his dream of a strong, rejuvenated Germany. There are decent emotions which lead misguided people to the Nazis, commented a liberal member of the Bavarian Democratic Party. Men who honorably desire to serve their people and their state. Because of this attitude, Bavarian police authorities, aggravated as they were, did little to restrain Hitlerian violence. The head of the army in Bavaria, General Otto von Lossow, was also resisting demands from Berlin to curb Hitler and to ban his newspaper. In the face of Lossow's continued defiance, he was dismissed, an act so infuriating to the Bavarian government that it assumed command of all Reichswehr units in the state. This defiance, tantamount to revolt, was repeated the next day by army men stationed throughout Bavaria. They renounced the Weimar Republic by taking an oath to the Bavarian government until an adjustment between Bavaria and the Reich has been arrived, and I renew my obligation to obey my superior officers. It was mutiny, executed legalistically, formally, and without violence, but mutiny nonetheless. There will be no civil war, a Bavarian cabinet member confided to Robert Murphy. The ship of state had merely listed too far to the left, and it was and is Bavaria's duty to right it. Commissar von Kahr himself attacked the federal government in print. In the Münchener Zeitung,
Basically Munich newspaper.
Thank you for the correction, Zeitung. He justified Bavarian defiance and called for an overthrow of the new government of Chancellor Gustav Stresemann, a self-made man with liberal faith in freedom and political rights. Stresemann himself was a nationalist. He charged that 33,000 Marxists held official posts in Prussia, and that as a result, domestic politics are purely Marxist. That is to say, they are directed against the natural order of things and are oriented towards compulsion, agitation, demagoguery, and street fighting. Foreign policy is becoming internationalized, and those who control it are careful to ensure that Germany never becomes powerful again. Here again were thoughts and words that could have come from Hitler. A few days later, General von Lossow, still in command of his troops despite dismissal by the Weimar Republic, was reported to have made a speech declaring that there were only three possibilities: going on as usual in the old jog-trot way, succeeding Bavaria from the Reich, or marching on Berlin to proclaim a national dictatorship. Hitler was dedicated to the last proposal. The secession of Bavaria from the federal government was as distasteful to him as doing nothing, since an independent Bavaria would probably mean a return to a monarchist government with Crown Prince Ruprecht, the Pretender, as king. Yet could he force Commissar von Kahr and General von Lossow to join him in a march on Berlin without declaring Bavarian independence? The answer was supplied by Rosenberg and Schuppner Richter. Their plan was to kidnap Prince Ruprecht, and Carr at the ceremony on November 4th, celebrating German Memorial Day. Several hundred stormtroopers would seal off the alley near the Feldherden Hall, where the dignitaries would assemble. Hitler would then politely inform the prisoners that he had seized the government to prevent a Red takeover and prevent the separation of Bavaria from the Reich. The putsch would be, according to Rosenberg, both short and painless, since Carr and Ruprecht would be impelled to cooperate. Hafstengel thought it was a crazy plan, arguing that any attack on the Crown Prince would surely force the army to retaliate, emphasizing the impracticability and senselessness of the operation. Hafstengel turned his warning into a personal attack on Rosenberg. If Hitler kept listening to these Baltic plotters, he said, it would mean the ruin of the movement. Hitler agreed to veto the kidnapping, but would make no immediate promises concerning Rosenberg. We must think first of a march on Berlin, Hafstengel remembered him saying. Once we have dealt with the immediate situation, then we can look around and I can find Rosenberg another job. So now we're starting to see the plan of the putsch come into place. So, as the author pointed out, the sole plan was to hold the government in Berlin as hostage. And based on them cooperating because they would have Carr and the Crown Prince as hostage, they were hoping that would in turn give them the national power.
Yeah, so first off, as we said at the very top, this is a coup, not a president inciting a riot and then going to the building where some of the legislators are. That was not a coup. That was a riot. It was wrong, but that was a riot. That was not a coup in any shape, way, form, or manner. There is zero definition on this planet where that constitutes a coup, despite what the media says, despite what politicians say. Right here, we're seeing a coup, a plan to forcibly remove those in power and take over the government and replace the government with their own. That is a coup.
Yes,
This
sir.
right here. Anything else is not a coup.
Yep, anything else at best is a riot. All right. Next it says, by now, the Bavarian government was run under the supervision of Minister President von Nilling by a triumvirate of Vons, Karl, Lassalle, and Colonel Hans Ritter von Caesar, chief of the Bavarian State Police, who had gathered together a group of bright staff officers too young to challenge his position. The triumvirate resembled a dictatorship in the old Roman caretaker sense, and though the three men represented a variety of ultra-conservative and right-radical values, they agreed that Hitler's revolutionary tactics were not pro bono publico and should either be channeled properly or just outlawed. The breaking point was reached on the 30th of October when Hitler made it clear to a widely receptive audience at the Circus Krone that he was ready to march on Berlin. The German problem will be solved for me only after the black, white, red swastika banner floats on the Berlin Palace, he shouted. We all feel that the hour has come, and, like the soldier in the field, we will not shirk our duty as Germans. We will follow the order to keep in step and march forward. In an effort to split the triumvirate, Hitler requested an interview with Colonel von Caesar. They met privately on the 1st of November at the home of a veterinary who headed the Bonn Oberland, a nationalistic paramilitary organization. Hitler tried to persuade Caesar that Karl was unfit and only a pawn of the Bavarian government, then proposed, and he had a week earlier, that Caesar and Losau align themselves with himself and Ludendorff. But Caesar again declared he would have nothing to do with the World War idol, nor would the top officers in the army. Hitler admitted that while the generals would be against Ludendorff, majors and lower grade officers would support him in defiance of their own commanders. It was high time to take action, warned Hitler. Our people are under such economic pressure that we must either act or they will swing to the communists. While Caesar privately agreed with Karl that the Nazis were trash, both did act. On the 6th of November, the Triumvirate conferred with representatives of the nationalist organizations. Their most urgent task, said Karl, was the establishment of a new national regime. They all agreed that the Weimar government had to be overthrown, but it must be done in concert and not independently as certain nationalist organizations were planning. He didn't mention any name, but everyone knew he was referring to Hitler. It was questionable, said Karl, if Chancellor Stresemann could be ousted in the normal way. The atypical way must be prepared. Preparations have already been made. But if the atypical way must be taken, then everyone must cooperate. It must be accomplished according to a united, sufficiently prepared, and thought out plan. The next speaker, Losau, supported Karl and his determination to crush any putsch by force of arms. I am ready to support a rightist dictatorship if the affair is likely to succeed, said the general. He would participate if there was a 51% chance for success. But if we are merely to be harassed into a putsch, which will come to a sorry end in 5 or 6 days, I will not cooperate. In conclusion, both he and Colonel von Caesar underlined their warnings to members of the Battle League to cooperate or else. So, now we're seeing a little bit of opposition to Hitler's plans. You have both Colonel von Caesar and Commissar Karl essentially saying, if we can't do this in an orderly fashion to where there's at least a 51% chance of success, you can consider us non cooperative.
You know, myself personally, um, maybe you have, I don't know, but I've been in situations somewhat similar to this, and we've seen things like this play out in every aspect of human endeavor.
Mm.
You want to change, you're all for change, you're willing to do what's necessary for the change, but if you don't think that it's going to stick, that it's going to be successful, then you want nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen this over and over and over again. So it's like you feel as if you are in a difficult situation. So I get that. I understand that. And here we're seeing once again the biggest thing here for me is to drive home again that point. Humans are not monolithic in thought. They never have been, and they never will be. So anyone who says you got to be on code, there's no such thing.
No.
Well, other groups they move as one. No group moves as one. No group has ever moved as one. No, it
Mm-mm.
doesn't work that way. When you have mutually beneficial goals, you come together, you work together until those goals have been met, and then you go your separate ways.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't agree, then you don't act together with those who you don't agree with. That's human nature. But again, for me, that's one of the biggest takeaways here is that even within his inner circle, There were people who disagreed with the things that Hitler was saying and that he was going to do.
Right. And like you said, this clearly shows that even within a right wing group, which, you know, comes in many different fashion of folds, even in that regard, they were not monolithic. I mean, when you have Caesar and Carr saying, look, we're all for change and we're all for, we need to do something about this current governmental system, the Weimar Republic. But if we can't go about this in a more strategic fashion than trying to strong arm and be barbaric and taking over the government, don't count us in.
Yeah.
Clearly, that shows, even in a group like that, there's no such thing as monolithic thought. But
Because I'm reminded of jumping years down the line, like 20 years after, um, Operation Valkyrie, which was the biggest the biggest attempt to kill Hitler led by military soldiers,
mm-hmm,
and they were generals. They supported it, and they said, "Look, listen, I'm in, but if you can't guarantee me that this is going to work, I'm out, and I will denounce you, because if you fail, not only are you going to die, guess what? I'm going to die too. Why? Because I
mm-hmm,
was with you, and we did not kill him."
yep. So again, this whole notion about everybody's own code and everybody thinks monolithic thought and everybody's on the same page when it comes down to certain issues. I'm sorry, you still can't point to me one group of people who literally thought on the exact same thing on every single issue.
It just does not happen. It does not happen. Even when you have even those even those who are in power and who pull the strings, they disagree and they have differing views on things. But there are certain things that they will never waver on. They're in power, and they're going to do what's necessary to maintain that power. That's why they stay together. Different methods and different things in different directions they may be diametrically opposed on, but they do agree on the most important thing. They're in power and they're going to stay there. Again, that has nothing to do with monolithic thought. Monolithic thought, you know what? I could be wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm crazy. I'm from Mars. Monolithic thought, the idea of monolithic thought appeals to those who are in positions of nothing. You have nothing. You're at the bottom of the social economic strata. You have nothing. So you think monolithic thought is the way for you to now possibly get something. Only thought. I'm just putting that out there.
You know what, good sir? This is something I've been thinking about for a while. And you don't have to answer, and the audience don't have to answer, but just this is something I just want everybody to kind of ponder on, and maybe towards the end we can circle back. But riddle me this. I have seen patterns in history to where groups of people, or even, a group led by one person, whoever that may be, when it came time to take power or obtain power, they were mostly left leaning. But once they gained power, in order to maintain it, they were more right leaning.
You know, I've noticed the same thing. I really noticed the same thing. No matter how, no matter how for the people you claim to be or you were when you started out, you change over time because you realize all those ideals, they sound good. They don't actually work in reality.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really work in reality. Yeah, let's all sit around the campfire singing Disney songs. That sounds great, but who's going to make the hard choices? Are you even aware that there are hard choices? Look, listen. There are some things that can be done differently, and there are some things that are more beneficial. But it's not the way the world really works,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. Yeah, that's wow. That's a brilliant assessment. That's something. Yeah, I've noticed that myself. I've gone back and forth with that myself over the years. I've thought about that, and I've definitely found myself as I've gotten older. Yeah, definitely, definitely moderate right down the middle, and definitely a lot more conservative. And I've also noticed, almost without exception, again, there are no fast, definite things anywhere in life, but
Mm-hmm.
no matter where you started out in life, as you acquire more and more assets, you tend to become more conservative.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. And that's where I'm going at. That's where I was going at. Because I have met people that, you know, they did not have much going for them, but they were definitely left leaning. And they all about, equal rights, equity, and whatnot, and so to speak, we all in this together, and everything. Your struggle is my struggle, yada yada yada. But slowly but surely, once those people started getting their needs met and more, that's the key thing. They started getting their needs met and more. Once that started to happen, all of those left leaning thoughts just went to the wayside.
Absolutely, because all right, listen, we need roads. Okay, who's going to maintain the roads? Who's
Mm-hmm.
who's going to build the roads? We have engineers, but someone has to build buildings and high rises and schools. Someone has to work in these places, and then we need laws because we're people. Because we're not all monolithic in thought. There's going to be
Mm-hmm.
criminals. Someone has to arrest these people. Then we have to put these people somewhere. We need to educate the people. Um, everyone everyone is not going to be an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer. Fine, we get that. But guess what? Someone has to do the unskilled labor. Someone has to do it. And guess what? The money to pay for this has to come from somewhere. Oh, and by the way, we need natural resources. Oh,
And
some
I
go
was
right
going to
ahead.
say, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't a certain president once started his campaign on the notion of defund the police? But now, in his latest State of the Union, said the answer is not to defund the police, but to fund more police.
You know, I'll say this. I'll say this. There was a certain there was a certain police officer who was from my home city,
Mm,
and he was the leader of a group called 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. And he was a member. He was an officer. He was a lieutenant for a long time, very long time.
mm-hmm.
Pro-black, social justice warrior before the term ever even existed. Enemy to the police, fought the police, always holding the police accountable. Fast forward, I hear a news report. He finally got a promotion to captain because captain is not a civil service position. You have to be appointed. So he took a promotion to captain for one day to then retire so he could retire on a captain's pension. And I know that day, of all the people to sell out, this guy sold out. Okay,
Mm.
fast forward years later, he gets elected to the city as mayor. And what does he do? He reaches out to the police department. And the head of the rank and file police officers union is on the podium next to him. And he's saying police are our friends and we have to put money toward the police, and we need stronger, better police, and they need to have the tools to fight crime. And I'm like, whoa, but guy, you yourself literally, when you first campaigned for mayor, you talked
Mhm.
about defund the police. And now that you're mayor, you've done a complete 180.
You know what? Let's move on, but before we go deeper, because let's move to the next one.
The hypocrisy knows no ends. There's a reason
No
why they say
ends.
politics makes for strange bedfellows, because it's
Hmm.
it's it's not just the fact that sometimes your your goals and your needs will align to people who were once your enemies. But also, there's a lot of hypocrisy and BS.
Hmm. Yes,
Anyway,
sir.
I digress.
So next it says that evening, Hitler met with his advisors in the apartment of Scoopner Reichert to draft their own plan of action. They agreed to stage a full-fledged putsch on the following Sunday, November the 11th. There were two reasons for this date, one historical, one practical. This would be the fifth anniversary of Germany's surrender. It would also be a holiday with all offices deserted and police and military at low strength. The streets would be relatively free of traffic and the stormtroopers could march unimpeded. The next morning, the conspirators met again, this time with the senior leader of the Battle League. Probably Ludendorff was present, though he later denied it, but Hitler certainly was there, and so were Goering and Richter. Final arrangements for the putsch were adopted. The major towns and cities of Bavaria would be controlled with the seizure of railroad stations, telegraph offices, telephone offices, radio stations, public utilities, town halls, and police headquarters. Communist and socialist leaders, along with trade union heads and shop stewards, were to be arrested. Numerically, Hitler's forces in Munich would have superiority with 4,000 armed putschists facing perhaps 2,600 state police and army troops. Early that same evening, Hitler called a second meeting, this time with two additional members, ex-police president Pollner and his former assistant, Wilhelm Frick, who had remained with the police and was still protecting Hitler and his followers. The conspirators discussed a development that called for a drastic change in plan. Commissar von Kahr had unexpectedly announced he was holding a mass patriotic demonstration at the Burger Brockler the next night. The outward purpose was to outline the aims of his regime, but it was probably an attempt to forestall any display of unified action by the National Socialists among leading government officials, military leaders, and prestigious civilians. Hitler was asked to attend, but it seemed obvious that the invitation was a trap. Perhaps the triumvirate was going to announce Bavaria's break with Berlin and the restoration of the Wittelsbach monarchy. Hitler argued that it was a heaven-sent opportunity. The triumvirate, as well as Minister President von Neeling and other government officials, would be on the same platform. Why not simply escort them to a private room and either convince them to go along with the coup d'etat, or, if they were adamant, imprisoned him. Hitler was undoubtedly talking for effect. He knew very well that he could not mount a successful putsch without the full cooperation of the triumvirate. He had no real intention of seizing the government of Bavaria, only of attempting to arouse the Bavarians by dramatics and thus successfully defy Berlin. He actually had no long range program and was willing to trust to luck and fate. His co conspirators were not, and the argument went on for hours. But Hitler refused to budge, and finally, at 3 a.m. on November the 8th, everyone accepted, if reluctantly, his proposal. The putsch would be launched that night at the Burger Brockeler. As soon as the guests filled out in the cold early morning, Herr Scootner Wright handed his servant a packet of letters addressed to influential publishers to be delivered as soon as their offices opened. So, here we are seeing again the plans of the putsch. And I mean, quite honestly, when Hitler said that he had no long term plan of what he was going to do if it succeeded, that kind of showed me right there that he was only thinking in the here and now.
Exactly. But when all you have is rhetoric, that's all you do have is the here and now. So no one takes you seriously. Unfortunately, here's the thing. He was someone to be taken seriously, and he had a legitimate following. The problem in this instance, he had no long-term plan for this coup. He was
Mm-hmm.
hoping that things would just somehow magically fall into place. But the larger issue is he had no plan. He was just going on a wing and a prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So he relied on rhetoric and emotion and nothing else. So interesting is all I can say.
Indeed, and believe me, there's going to be many instances of Hitler just going on a whim on a lot of his ideas. There was Hitler, sad to say, because he never had an officer position in the military, long term planning definitely was not his repertoire. Because any officer in the military, especially your generals, your admirals, and those of the same rank, which definitely later on will show the type of thinking they do,
Mm-hmm.
they will tell you you have to plan for best case scenarios and for worst case scenarios.
You have to. You always have to have a backup plan. You have to have a plan and a backup plan. And you always, even when you foresee nothing but victory, you always plan for defeat. That's why they conduct war games. That's why they have drills. That's why they have militaries have departments that are dedicated to nothing other than total abject loss. And what does
Mm-hmm.
that look like? And then once they see that and understand that, then they plan accordingly around that to counter that, to prevent that. But again, that requires you having gone to war college, which
Mm-hmm.
Hitler never did because he was never an officer. He had no career in the military other than
Nope.
being a foot soldier. And once the war was over, he was out because he had consistently bad fitness reports. So he was never promoted to become an officer. So the, the lesson here cannot be overstated. If you don't have a plan and all you have is rhetoric and you're just going on a wing and a prayer, you're going to end up nowhere.
I just thought of something, but I'm gonna leave it alone because yeah. Let me go to the next paragraph.
I wonder why this. I wonder why there's a never-ending gender war. I mean, I've never heard a dumber thing in my life. A gender war? Are you kidding me? What kind of abject stupidity is this? But whatever. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Let's get out of that rabbit hole real quick. Next, next it says it dawned bitter and windy. The cold had come early to Bavaria that year, and snow was already falling in the hills south of the city. One of the most important days of Hitler's life, he had a headache and a throbbing toothache. His colleagues had urged him to see a dentist, but he said he didn't have time and that there was going to be a revolution which would change everything. He must follow his star. When Hafstagel asked what would happen to their project if he fell seriously ill, Hitler replied, "If that should be the case, or if I should die, it would only be a sign that my star has run its course and my mission is fulfilled." Late that morning, orders were issued to the SA leaders by phone, letter, or in person to alert their men for action. There were no details, no explanations. Moreover, many of those closest to Hitler still had no idea there was a change in plans. Just before noon, his little whitewashed office, Rosenberg, sporting a violet shirt and scarlet tie, was discussing the morning's Volkshoer Beobachter with Hafstagel. On the front page was a picture of the general who had brought the Prussian army to the Russian side against Napoleon in Tarogin. The caption was, "Shall we find a second General York in our hour of need?" While these two, who detested each other, were weighing the possible effects of the picture, they heard stamping outside and a hoarse voice. "Where is Captain Goring?" The door was flung open, and Hitler, wearing his tightly belted trench coat and gripping his whip, burst in, pallid with excitement. Swear you will not mention this to a living soul," he said with suppressed urgency. "The hour has come. Tonight we act." He asked them both to be part of his personal escort. They were to bring pistols and rendezvous outside the beer hall at 7 o'clock. Hafstagel hurried home to tell his wife to take their son, Egon, to the villa they had just built in the country. They then informed a number of international journalists, including H.R. Knickerbocker, that they must under no circumstances miss the meeting that evening. By afternoon, Hitler had controlled his excitement and was gossiping at the Café Heck with Heinrich Hoffmann, his photographer crony, as though this was just another ordinary day. Suddenly, Hitler suggested they visit Esser, who was laid up with jaundice. While Hoffmann waited outside, Hitler revealed to Esser that he was going to announce the national revolution that evening. He needed help. At exactly 9:30 p.m., Esser, carrying a flag, was to rush up the podium of the Lohenbräukeller, where a nationalist meeting was to be held, and announce the National Socialist Revolution. Hitler emerged to tell Hoffmann that Esser felt much better, and the two strolled aimlessly along the Schellenstrasse. Moments later, Göring approached, and Hitler took him off to the private talk, only to return with the announcement that he had a terrible headache and must leave. By now, Hoffmann was completely bewildered. What on earth, he asked, was Hitler doing that evening? He answered mysteriously that he would be very busy on a very important job, then set off for a party headquarters. By now, the SA men were getting out of their work clothes and putting on uniforms, which consisted of field gray windbreakers with swastika armbands, field gray ski caps, and revolver belt. They were bound for various rendezvous. Karl Kessler of the Second Company, was instructed to report the Arzberger Keckler, while shoemakers Joseph Reichert was sent to the Hofbrauhaus. Members of the Bonn Oberland were also on the move. Instead of a swastika, they were a sprig of Edelweiss and were equipped with steel helmets. One of the key units, the Fuhrer's special 100-man bodyguard, gathered at the Torbra. Their leader, a tobacconist, was haranguing them. Any one of you who isn't going into this heart and soul had better get out right now. It was their task, he said, to bear the brunt of whatever happened that night at the Burger Brockler. We're going to run the government out. It was dark when a car stopped in front of Scoopner Reichert's apartment house and General Ludendorff got out. He talked a few minutes with Scoopner Reichert, then left. Moments later, Scoopner Reichert and his servant also drove off at top speed. Hansel, Scoopner Reichert said, if things don't go right today, we will all be in jail tomorrow. At party headquarters, they met Hitler and other leaders. After some discussion, the group headed for the Burger Brockkeller in 2 cars. It was almost 8 p.m. The beer hall was about half a mile from the center of Munich, on the other side of the Isar River. It was a large rambling building, flanked by gardens and containing a number of dining rooms and bars. The main hall, the largest in the city, except for the Circus Krone, could hold 3,000 at its sturdy, round wooden tables. Officials knew there might be trouble, and there were on hand 125 municipal policemen to control the crowd. In addition, there was a mounted detachment as well as a number of officers scattered in the audience. In case of an emergency, a company of green uniformed state police had been installed in a barracks only a quarter of a mile away. By the time the Hitler caravan crossed the Isar River, the hall was closed to all but important personages. Every seat was taken, and Hamstickel wasn't able to bring in his little group of international journalists. A few minutes past 8, Hitler's red Mercedes, followed by Scoopner Reichert's car, approached the beer hall. Hitler was disturbed by the milling crowds. Would his trucks be able to get through this mob? The 2 cars slowly pushed their way to the front entrance, which was blocked by a phalanx of policemen. Hitler persuaded the police to leave and make room for his troops, which were expected shortly, then led the way through the beer hall door, which Hess held open. There was such a crush that the door shut in the face of Hamstickel, who was bringing up the rear with an American woman journalist. He warned the police that there would be a scandal if the foreign press was excluded. But what opened the way was the fact that his companion was smoking an American cigarette, a luxury in Germany. At the edge of the anteroom, Hitler stood near a large pillar, peering into the jammed hall at the platform where a car was speaking in a droning voice. He denounced Marxism and called for a resurgent Germany. His manner was pedantic, as if he were lecturing, and the audience listened politely, relieving the boredom with beer. Hamstickel figured that Hitler would fit more naturally into the scene if he too had a beer, and so bought 3 at the serving counter for 3 billion marks. Keep in mind, he bought 3 beers for 3 billion marks. Hitler occasionally sipped his as he waited impatiently for the special brown shirt bodyguard unit. Trucks filled with other stormtroopers were already outside, but they stayed in place until a few minutes after 8:30 p.m., when his helmeted bodyguard finally arrived. This was the signal for action. The trucks emptied and the armed Nazis surrounded the building. Bewildered and outnumbered, The municipal police, unprepared for a political battle, did nothing. Captain Goering and the bodyguard unit, armed with machine pistols, streamed into the building. Ulrich Graf, Hitler's personal protector, was waiting in the cloakroom for their arrival and hurried up to his chief, who had removed his trench coat to reveal a black, long-tailed morning coat cut in Bavarian provincial style. Graf whispered into Hitler's ear, and it reminded one onlooker of a patron petitioning the head waiter for a good table. More than 20 police blocked the invaders, but the leader of the bodyguard unit shouted, "Out of the way! You there!" And the police obediently did an about face, like Keystone cops, and marched in step right at the front door. Hitler set aside the beer he had been nursing, pulling out his Browning pistol, and as the stormtrooper shouted, "Heil Hitler!" he started into the hall with ex-butcher Graf, Scoopner Richter, who was squinting myopically in the smoke-filled room, and his faithful servant, Harvard graduate Hamstickle, an ex-police spy, business manager Max Amen, and the idealist activist student of geopolitics, Rudolf Hess.
Remember that name.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Remember that name for sure. Next it says, brandishing weapons, this motley band began pushing its way through the packed humanity towards the platform. By this time, one group of brown shirts had blocked the exit, while another group set up a machine gun positioned to rake the audience. Tables overturned in the uproar. A cabinet member scrambled for cover under his table. Some made for the exits in consternation, but were warned back, and if they resisted, were beaten or kicked. The Hitler phalanx was blocked, and amidst the uproar, he climbed onto a chair waving his pistol. "Quiet!" he shouted, and when the tumult continued, he fired a round into the ceiling. In the shocked silence, Hitler said, "The National Revolution has broken out. The hall is surrounded." No one was to leave the hall. Sweat poured down his pale face. He looked insane or drunk to some, but a few were struck by the ridiculous sight of a pistol-brandishing revolutionary in such a badly cut morning suit. Comic as he looked, Hitler was dead serious. He ordered the triumvirate to follow him into an adjoining room, guaranteeing their security. But the three men did not move. Finally, Carr took a backward step as Hitler began clambering over a table towards the speaker's platform. Caesar's aide, a major, came forward, hand in pocket as if about to draw his pistol. Hitler jammed his own pistol against the major's forehead and says, "Take your hand out." Hitler assured the triumvirate and the audience that everything would be settled in 10 minutes. This time, the three men and two aides followed Hitler to the side room. "Commodi Spielen," put on an act, whispered Losau to his colleagues. In the private room, Hitler was more agitated than ever. "Please forgive me for proceeding in this matter," he said, "but I had no other means." He answered Caesar's accusations of breaking his word not to make a putsch with an apology. He did it for the good of Germany. He told them that ex-police president Pollner was going to be the new Bavarian minister president, and Ludendorff would assume command of the new national army based on a radical right battle league and lead the march on Berlin. After the putschists seized power, Hitler promised the triumvirate would have even greater powers. Karl would be made regent of Bavaria, Losau Reich Army Minister, and Caesar Reich Police Minister. When the three failed to respond, Hitler drew out his pistol. All in jest, he later testified. "There are 5 rounds in it," he said hoarsely. "4 for the traitors, and if it fails, 1 for me." He handed over the weapon to Graf, who already was armed with a machine pistol. Under such circumstances, to die or not to die was meaningless, replied Carr coolly. What interested him was General Ludendorff's position in the matter. Hitler didn't seem to know what to do. He took several quick swallows of beer, apologized to Carr, then charged out of the room. The audience outside was getting out of hand. Someone shouted, "Theater!" Another, that this was a Mexican revolution. How ironic. There was a cacophony of whistles and jeers until Goering, emulating his chief, fired a pistol shot into the ceiling. He bellowed out that this display was not directed against Carr, the Reichswehr, or the police state. When argument failed, he tried humor. "You've got your beer," he shouted. "What are you worrying about?" The uproar did not faze Hitler. He pushed his way to the platform, ignoring the catcalls and insults. He raised his pistol. The din continued, and he shouted angrily, "If silence is not restored, I will order a machine gun placed in the gallery." All of a sudden, he was no longer the figure of fun. What followed then, recalled Professor von Mueller, the conservative historian, was an oratorical masterpiece which any actor might well envy. He began quietly, without any pathos. He made it appear as if the triumvirate was about to come around as he assured the audience that Carr had his full trust and would be regent of Bavaria. He promised that Ludendorff would assume leadership of the army, that Lossow would be army minister, and Caesar police minister. The task of the provisional German national government is to organize the march on that sinful Babel, Berlin, and save the German people. So, before we continue, good sir, what are your thoughts so far on the makings of this coup, attempted coup at the moment?
Well, does not seem well organized, and it's a lot of promises, and it's a lot of rhetoric, and it's a lot of empty hot air that sounds good. It makes people feel good, but again, it's not well organized, and there's when all you have is rhetoric and emotion, you know, you you can't be successful without a plan. And he had no plan. And here you
Hmm.
see he has support and he has backers, but they have no plan. So
Hmm.
there's really no surprise why this thing collapsed and it failed.
Right. And honestly, like just reading through these passages, to me, it just seemed that the agitators, the ones who are attempted this coup, it was just so chaotic. Anybody was doing their own thing. Hitler is unsure of himself, simply was just, so to speak, going where the wind blows and everything. And it, yeah, this Hitler's first attempt at national power definitely showed a lot of weak points here.
Yeah, he was never a student. He was never a student of politics. He was never a student of revolution. It's like, how can I put this? It's like he was so caught up in the end result, or he was so caught up in change, he never studied how to actually bring about that change. You
Right.
follow me?
Hmm.
But but hey, listen, all you need, according to some people, is emotion and rhetoric, and the rest will somehow magically carry you through.
Oh, and let's not forget policies.
Oh God,
But let's
oh,
continue. Let's
I get
let's
such
continue.
a headache when I hear that. I'm sorry. Yeah, let's continue.
From the first words, recall Hamstickle, the insignificant man in the comical cutaway, who resembled a nervous provincial bridegroom on display in the dusty window of a Bavarian village photographer, became a Superman. It was like the difference between a Stradivarius lying in his case, just a few bits of wood in length of catgut, and the same violin being played by a master. Professor von Mueller couldn't remember in his entire life such a change of attitude of a crowd in a few minutes, almost a few seconds. There were certainly many who were not yet converted, but the sense of the majority had fully reversed itself. Hitler had turned them inside out, as one turns a glove inside out, with a few sentences. It had almost something of hocus pocus, or magic about it. Loud approval rolled forth. No further opposition was to be heard. Outside are Carr, Lusau, and Caesar, Hitler said earnestly. They are struggling hard to reach a decision. May I say to them that you will stand behind them? Ja, ja, roared the crowd. In a free Germany, shouted the impassioned Hitler, there is also room for an autonomous Bavaria. I can say this to you. Either the German Revolution begins tonight, or we will all be dead by dawn. The crowd, he headed back for the private room to bring the triumvirate to heel. The man who could decide the matter was already approaching the Burger Brockeler in Hitler's Mercedes. General Ludendorff was in the back seat with his stepson, an ardent pugilist, and Scoopner Reichert. Despite the fog, their car careened across the bridge from the inner city at reckless speed. The sight of the general at the entrance of the beer hall brought a chorus of howls, but Ludendorff, seeing how far things had gone, was amazed and far from pleased. Hitler hurried out of the anteroom to shake hands with him. They conversed briefly, and the scowling Ludendorff agreed to help convince the triumvirate. They disappeared into the side room. Irritated as he was by Hitler's unilateral action, Ludendorff applied the force of his rank and personality on his two fellow officers. All right, gentlemen, he told them, come along with us and give me your hand on it. It was the general who responded first. Losau extended his hand and said, good. Then the colonel gave his hand to Ludendorff. The civilian, Carr, was the last to submit, but the first to speak once the entire group returned to the platform. Ramrod stiff, his face a mask, the commissar declared that he would serve Bavaria as regent for the monarchy. The applause that interrupted this sober announcement was fanatic, according to one police official. As he surveyed the enthusiastic audience, Hitler was in a state of ecstasy. I am going, he said emotionally, to fulfill the vow I made to myself 5 years ago when I was a blind cripple in the military hospital, to know neither rest nor peace until the November criminals had been overthrown, until on the ruins of the wretched Germany of today there should have arisen once more a German of power and greatness, of freedom and splendor. Then Ludendorff, pale and sober, spoke briefly and earnestly, giving Mueller the impression that here was a man who realized this was a matter of life and death, probably more death than life. In complete control of the situation, Hitler went down by the line shaking hands to the accompaniment of wave after wave of cheers. Overcome by mass excitement and beer, the audience could hardly contain its delight. Forgotten were earlier derision and even anger. The crowd stood and roared out Deutschland über alles. Tears streamed down many a cheek, and some people were so emotionally wrought they could not even sing. But someone next to a state police official turned and said, the only thing missing is the psychiatrist. All right, so that concludes at least this particular episode. We will pick up section 4 as we continue to review the beer hall pooch. But so far, good sir, what are your thoughts so far on tonight's stream and what we just read?
First, first and foremost, this is what a coup is. Well, not this. This was this was sheer chaos. But um, you know, for a man who was so organized and who knew how to control people and how to manipulate people and plan a movement, the fact that he had no plan for this actual coup is mind-boggling. But we all know how history turned out. The thing, the thing that stands out to me the most is that this is proof. This is proof that if all you have is empty rhetoric and nothing else, you're bound to to fail. And make no mistakes, Hitler failed. It wasn't until he got out of prison after he was arrested for this failed coup that he did things differently. And of course, we know how history turned out after. But in this instance, this goes to prove when all you have is emotion and rhetoric and words and feel good talk, you're not to be taken seriously because you're going to fail.
Mhm.
So when you talk about code and gender war and all sort of abject stupidity, you know, is it any wonder why no one takes you seriously? I mean, come on.
Exactly. And I also like the fact that we touch a little bit about the difference of inflation and hyperinflation. And I'm glad you shared your experience during the 1980s of that inflation as well. Because I want the audience to understand that, yes, there is inflation going on, but we're nowhere near levels of a hyperinflation. And trust and believe, knowing this American environment, if things were to really go in the direction of hyperinflation, best believe there would definitely be drastic measures taking place.
The thing is, right? To listen to some people talk, it's like they want it. It's like they want things to quote unquote hit the fan, almost as if it's some vindication. Like, yeah, look, Whitey's evil empire is over now. And it's like, hey, guy, don't you live in America? So if things hit the fan, you're gonna get hit worse.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yes,
you
sir.
It's like you're so caught up in your racist anti-white BS. Like you, you don't see reality for what it is. So I don't know. It's it's crazy, man. I cannot find words for the hypocrisy and the abject stupidity. Because here's the thing: you have a vested interest in the well-being of the country in which you live.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, for all of you who want to talk back to Africa and Pan Africanism and all this that's all fine, well, and great. But what about the land under your feet? The country that you were born in, the country that you live in. You have a vested interest in the well-being of that country because you live there. Your family lived there. Your children, if you have any, they live there as well. So why do you want to see the worst happen? What? Because now what? Your pro-act views are now somehow vindicated.
Hmm. Wow.
I don't know.
And,
Just
and, and then and then, sir, at what cost? Okay, so your your talking points have come true. Then what?
Bingo. Now what? Now what? Now what?
I mean, if anything, you're now in a worse position than you was beforehand, which again shows. This is why I really love showing as far as what was going on during this time frame in Germany 100 years later. Like for me, when you have people are being driven by such emotions and really feel like, so to speak, we could do things better if we just change this policy, or we could do things better if we just change, this action, or this group of settings. And it's like, this has happened before. And look what happened to the groups of people who went down this route.
You know, something else, right? As you say, then what? So here's the thing, right? People need to get out of their minds what they see in television and movies,
Mhm.
because what you're thinking, what you want to see, would literally have to happen to every country on the face of the planet simultaneously. Um, Now, granted, we've had COVID and how that's affected the world, granted, but if what you're talking happens and there is a collapse in America, forget what you see in film and television. There's no guarantee that you're going to see that same economic collapse around the world. So now,
Mhm.
where I'm going with that is, throughout history, when a country fails, when an empire collapses, the rest of the world moves on. And guess what? The people who live there in that country, they have to adapt to the new paradigm as well. And there's no guarantee that somehow now this kumbaya Pan African pro act fantasy that you have in your head, this paradigm is now somehow going to come about because America has economically collapsed. Because the last time I checked, where was this paradigm supposed to come from? I'll tell you where it's not coming from. It's not coming from Africa. So those arguments, I mean, they fall so flat when you apply critical thinking to them. But
Mhm.
again, I'm just a simple man trying to make his way in the galaxy.
Likewise, sir, I'm in the same boat. All I can say is I have learned to be observant, just like yourself. And as children of history, I just think to myself, huh, funny how history is certainly repeating itself, and yet
And
hardly anybody's paying attention.
throughout history, there has never been an empire that was totally erased that has ever come back.
Nope, never
Totally
happened.
erased, reduced, smaller, less influence, less power. Yes, but there has never been an empire that has been totally reduced to nothing that has come back. Not one, not ever. But yet somehow that's supposed to happen according to these people. Somehow the quote unquote original man is going to regain his power. Okay. So somehow something that has never happened in the history of this planet is somehow going to happen because you say it will. Okay. And we've just spent the past, I don't know, 2, 3 hours or so showing that when all you have is empty rhetoric and feel good talk, you will fail.
Mhm. Yes, sir. So, with that said, I am Admiral Sigma Jones. This is my co host, Logic Finest, the man of logic at that. We just want to thank our audience again for listening in, and those who will be listening in on the replay. Definitely tune in later this upcoming week because we do have another episode coming up where we're going to continue with the Beer Hall Pooch. So consider it as a double header of going forward because we're definitely going to not per se speed up the timeline, but we definitely would like to cover our other leaders during the 1920s. But rest assured, each episode, we're still going to look under every rock. We're still going to make sure no stone is left unturned. So that way our audience can see that there's more to history than what you read from your history books in schools and whatnot. Especially if you're a child of history, you're going to be looking at all resources and looking at both sides of the story, not just one side. But I feel that this with Hitler, we're definitely coming along. We're definitely, I don't know about the audience, but for certain, I am seeing many similarities of what was going on in the 20s here for Hitler and what we're witnessing today. To be the similarities, I put it like this: you would have to willfully ignore the similarities in order to not see it.
Yeah, but you know what, my friend? Unfortunately, that's human nature. People
Mm-hmm.
willfully ignore everything that's right in front of their eyes, because a beautiful lie is always more palatable than an ugly truth.
Very true. And that's, to me, that's the perfect statement to end on. So with that said, I am Admiral Sigma Jones, my co-host here, Logic Finest. Until next time.
Be well.